Welcome everybody to today's talk. I've been invited by the School of Life to share my lessons on turning my job into a climate career. In 2021, Antonio Guterres, the UN Secretary General, said it was a make or break year for the planet. He said it's now clear we are coming to a point of no return. And that was 2 years ago, so where are we now? I think that many of us are facing an existential crisis when it comes to the climate, and we're looking for ways to act. One thing in this environment is clear: every job must and also will become a climate job. So today my job is both movement building to drive climate action through the NGO that I founded, Creatives for Climate, and also storytelling to change and influence minds through the Humblebrag, my impact consultancy. How did I get here? Well, I didn't study sustainability or climate. I studied international relations and new media, and I have a mishmash career across working in things like film and radio, but also NGOs like HIVOS, and even global PR manager at Media Monks for a stint. In 2016, I became the head of communications for a leading global sustainable fashion initiative, and this was my first real experience working in sustainability. And this is where my first lesson on building my career for the climate began. What I learned is that there is a difference between sustainability and climate action. And in fact, knowing that difference can be fuzzy and also subjective, i.e. in the eyes of the beholder. My experience in figuring this out was at first feeling that sustainable fashion was my real calling, and I learned and did everything I could to create change and share my point of view on this. I wrote enthusiastically for publications like the Huffington Post, arguing, how can we shift sustainable fashion from niche to norm? Or writing for sustainable brands, saying, what difference can consumers really make? I even built a collective called the True Fashion Collective with some of my friends, where we put on events asking industry leaders what more can be done. My experience in figuring this out was at first feeling sustainable fashion was my real calling, and I did everything I learned and could do, which led to my second lesson. Individual behavior change is only meaningful when taken in collaboration with others, and the business sector is moving too slow to meet the needs of the climate crisis. 100 companies are responsible for 71% of global emissions. 90% of global carbon pollution comes from fossil fuels. And to comply with the Paris Climate Agreement, carbon pollution needs to decline by 50% by 2030. And this is pretty overwhelming to learn. But I think many of us are becoming aware of this. In 2019, I engaged Extinction Rebellion to put on this event called Creatives for Climate. I wanted to engage the world's brightest minds in advertising and marketing and the persuasive industries with the confrontational truth of the emergency that we're living in. And what happened was that this audience was mobilized and people turned to us, Creatives for Climate, thinking we were an organization. At the time it was just an event, saying, what can we do? And from this day on, my role changed. I went from founder, business owner, and service provider to activist, movement builder, and chairwoman of an NGO. And since we've been growing as a movement, we started in 2019 as a summit in response to a cry from Extinction Rebellion to act. In 2020, we started experimenting with our collective ability to act. And in 2021, also prompted by COVID, we formed as an online collaboration hub. And only since 2022 have we actually been an organized nonprofit entity. What we've been doing throughout this journey and what we are continuing to do is exploring new ways to learn, connect, and take action. And we even launched a course called the Greenwash Watch, where actually we're certifying communicators in anti-greenwashing and climate communications. And I've balanced my night job running a global nonprofit with my day job in business for good. And I can tell you what I've learned is that both approaches are actually needed to drive systemic change. The role of activism is to hold industry to account. It's to set the bar and show us where we need to go. But transforming business is actually where change happens. And we need tangible examples of what this transition looks like. And we need people like you and people like me in green jobs making this happen. Which led to my third lesson. I created my climate jobs. So a thought I want to offer you is perhaps there is another approach rather than waiting for the perfect opportunity to come or auditioning for it. And I want you to think about how could you take control of your story and visibility to accelerate your opportunities in this space. Well, this is also the part of the puzzle that I train people on. I help people build their positioning, visibility, and thought leadership as a change maker through the Humblebrag, which today I want to talk about, for leaderships, teams, organizations, and individuals too. And I've walked the talk leading communication strategies for some of the world's biggest and most ambitious climate organizations. So, my story. I have a mixed background working across different sectors, as I said, and also this urgency to use my time, talent, and power to drive good in this world. But as I said, it took me a long time to figure out what good meant. And throughout the early stages of my career, I didn't feel my personal values were aligned with my work. So what I did was I created a strategy to take control of the opportunities that came my way. And I used the power of strategic visibility to find ways to share my radical ideas with the world and be taken seriously. And the braver I became, the more outrageous I became, but using a strategic approach to visibility and thought leadership, the more values-aligned opportunities came my way. But the path wasn't paved. I had to create it. And the point is, if I wanted to build a climate career, I needed to gain the skills to do the job, which was obviously essential, but also be strategic as to when and how I made myself visible for my beliefs. I had to tell people about my skills and tell people and show people how I could possibly fit into their strategies. And so after putting this strategy into practice, invitations that were aligned with what I wanted to be doing and my kind of wild ideas, my idealistic ideas, started to open more doors. And rather than pitch for opportunities, those requests came to me. So the skill set lies in a mix of skills, being able to really work in the climate space, the hard skills, but also authenticity, taking action, and the secret ingredient, visibility. Because like it or not, personal branding actually is a tool. And as cringe as the concept might sound to some of you, especially the hardline activists and social impact makers out there, I want to tell you that it can be really powerful to help you in your change-making impact journey. And so this is what we do at the Humblebrag. I started the Humblebrag with a mission to help others use visibility for good, to support more leaders, emerging and existing, as well as companies and brands build their influence and impact and be brave about driving change. And I built Creators for Climate as a place for this new leadership to come to life. So in case you're not yet convinced, I want to tell you about why you need to be raising your voice for change and step into this movement. A few years ago when I started the Humblebrag, or 5 years ago exactly, I would go around and tell people that the world we're living in has changed, but it has radically changed. We've already passed that point. Business as usual needs to change. Our environment is at a tipping point, and our social structures are not yet fair, diverse, or inclusive. And so in this climate, there is a call for new leadership to rise, and a call for businesses and organizations to respond as the solution. And we've gone from let's not get political to everything is political, where silence is a risky strategy. In 2020, the Harvard Business Review said, these issues are not ones that organizations or their leaders, from CEOs at the top of the hierarchy to team managers on the front line, can ignore. And silence is violence. Not raising your voice is no longer an option. I want to argue to the skeptics that this is about risk management. As an organization and as an individual, you have to be prepared to be responsive. So good news is, the organizations we work in are being called to reimagine their role. And there are growing opportunities to stand up, speak up, and align your values with your work. So how do you raise your voice in this movement? Well, you actually have to be walking the talk. You actually have to become a force for good. And more than a buzzword, agents of change have a key role to play. These are the individuals that do more than just criticize. They don't just try and right everybody with their wrongs. They actually paint a vision of what can be. They go beyond fear and offer hope. And right now, we need ordinary people stepping up to share their learnings, insights, and ideas with the world. And it's not easy, because a lot of the issues we're facing today are very complex. And many face the challenge to speak up and share their views with the world. And this is true both for leaders and individuals as it is for organizations and brands. I'm not a change maker. I'm not an expert. I don't have all the answers. What if I get it wrong? I haven't yet figured out what I want to say. I'll get to it, or it's not my problem. Finding your voice isn't easy in this movement, but honestly, nothing about this movement in this moment in time is easy. I want to stress, however, that finding your voice is actually a key skill to learn to amplify your impact. and that storytelling is the most powerful way to put ideas into the world and inspire other people to act. So here is what we teach through cohorts, courses, and trainings and workshops for companies and brands. This is the framework. 1, define and communicate your purpose. So in response to a changing climate, we are all being asked to do something and become change agents, every single one of us. And key to driving bigger change is tapping into your purpose, your authentic purpose. But what is that? Well, I'm an impact strategist, not a life coach. But what I know is find and define your purpose and you will find your voice. And there are amazing frameworks out there that we can work through to help you find this purpose. But it's the communication and activation of the purpose and making it visible and tangible for others that will really encourage people to champion what you're doing. Number 2, activate your values. Your values form the core of your personal brand as leader or your organization. They are the core in which you build and can move into alignment with your values. Living your values and making this visible is actually the key to building your brand. You can do all the talking in the world, but if you're not walking, it doesn't mean a lot. Your story. What story are you telling the world about yourself? How are you pitching yourself? How does your mission and your values and your key messages show up in the world? Whatever you're not changing, you are choosing. So taking the time to think about your core story is a really powerful way for becoming a magnet for the opportunities that you deserve. And lastly, thought leadership and media visibility. People are searching for new perspectives to make sense of this mad moment in time, to follow, learn from, and champion. And more than bragging, sharing your thoughts in the open can actually be a gift to others in the sector, to learn from, learn with you, and explore new ideas. Thought leadership isn't just becoming famous or stroking your ego. In practice, in fact, it can look like many things. It can look like setting the agenda, engaging in debate, sharing your view. These are some of the publications I've written for. But also being vulnerable with your ideas, asking questions, sharing challenges or failings. And I think that this is particularly difficult for organizations to embrace, but so powerful. I like to think of thought leadership as learning in the open and being generous enough to expose and empower others with lessons from your journey. Because we live in a culture shaped by stories, and by raising your voice and by using visibility as a tool, you are playing an active part in building the world that we live in. So the framework looks like starting with your personal story or the story of your team or the story of your organization, defining your thought leadership strategy for how to activate it, and lastly, using media and using visibility to get that third-party validation to reach new audiences and to change narratives in the global sphere. It looks like establishing your visibility goals, creating a clear positioning statement, learning about the values of the power of values, learning about the power of values-driven leadership, unpacking your personal values, whether you're working for an organization or not. How do you, as a brand ambassador, bring that to life? Crafting your stories. What is it about you that makes you uniquely powerful and uniquely positioned to drive this mission forward? What are the topics and themes that make sense for you and your role to own? How can you turn your wild ideas into news angles? What is it that media and journalists are looking for? How can you cut through and create noise? And lastly, how can you deal with disagreement and getting it wrong when you're being so visible? How can you make sure that your voice is landing and aligning with bigger movements? So the framework we've created consists of 6 modules: a workbook, many lessons from global leaders, and we'll leave you with an action toolkit. Walking the talk in this space, I can tell you that my biggest takeaways on visibility in this new age of leadership is on vulnerability. Brené Brown, an expert in social connection, conducted thousands of interviews to discover what lies at the root. Vulnerability. And it doesn't mean being weak or submissive. To the contrary, it implies the courage to be yourself. It means replacing professional distance and cool with uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure. And again, I think it's just as powerful as it is for an individual as it is for an organization or a brand that really wants to connect. So if you are inspired to use the power of storytelling and visibility to drive social impact and change, we'd love to have you engage with what we're doing at the Humblebrag, and we thank the School of Life so much for this platform.